Hello, everyone, and welcome. We will be waiting an extra 2 minutes for any additional guests to arrive. It has been 2 minutes, so I want to again welcome everyone to the July installment of our monthly webinar series hosted by the Hunt Institute. I am Dr. Waverly Wissenant, the Deputy Director of Higher Education at the Hunt Institute. The Hunt Institute is a national nonprofit dedicated to supporting and advising education leaders and policymakers nationwide on education issues across the education continuum. Artificial intelligence is no longer an avoidable thing of the past. With its interest into the mainstream, it has become a hot topic in the world of higher education. Faculty, institutions, and policymakers alike have been struggling to come to a consensus on how and when and where to use AI to maximize student success and achievement. Today, we have 3 experts in the field from around the country who will help us frame the topic of artificial intelligence in higher education. To support the discussion, our 3 resource experts are Phaedra Boinodiris, IBM Consulting's Global Leader for Trustworthy AI, Jason Hovey, Director of School Partnerships at Khan Academy, and Dr. Trey Vasquez, Director and Professor at the Tony Jennings Exceptional Education Institute at the University of Central Florida. We will start the conversation with Phaedra Boinodiris, who currently leads IBM's Consulting Trustworthy AI practice. She is the AI Ethics Board's focal for all consulting, serves on the leadership team of IBM's Academy of Technology, and leads IBM's Trustworthy AI Center of Excellence. Boinodiris is a co-founder of the Future World Alliance, a 501c3 dedicated to curating K-12 education in AI ethics. She is pursuing her PhD in AI and ethics at University College Dublin's Smart Lab. In 2019, she won the United Nations Women of Influence in STEM and Inclusivity Award and was recognized by Women in Games International as one of the top 100 women in the games industry, as she began one of the first scholarship programs in the United States for women to pursue degrees in game design and development. Thank you so much for joining us, Phaedra.
My pleasure.
Yes, Phaedra, as a consultant for AI, you specialize in governance and ethics of AI. What are some of the risks and ethical concerns surrounding AI, and how should we be teaching the subject of AI in schools?
Well, it's a very big question. And before I answer it, I just want to preface by saying AI is an incredibly powerful tool that can be used in so many wonderful ways in education. Schools, administrators, and teachers can use it to create much better assessments that are far more equitable than the ones we have today. Teachers can use it in order to be able to be better teachers, optimize their time. And certainly students can use it so that they can have actual modern tools to solve modern day problems. That being said, the whole challenge or the whole space of AI ethics and governance really what we're trying to do is have our own human values be reflected in technologies like AI, right? We expect AI to not lie to us. We expect it to not discriminate. We expect it to be safe for us and for our kids to use. And this isn't strictly a technical challenge with a technical solution at all. In fact, it's a socio-technical challenge. And anytime you have something that is a socio-technical challenge, you have to approach it holistically. You've got to be thinking about people, process, tools. People meaning what is the right organizational culture required to create AI responsibly? Which are the right safeguard rails, AI governance processes, and the tools in AI engineering framework, so you can even know, are these models behaving in the way that you ultimately expect them or need them to behave? And I'm certain you and your audience can guess which of those three is the most challenging, right? People, process, tools. It is, if you guess people, you're absolutely correct. It is definitely the people. And there are many reasons why it is so challenging, like why people. But before I get to that, I want to give you some examples of, what does harm look like? Because I want you to understand, even organizations that truly have the best of intentions with the use of artificial intelligence, because of their lack of understanding, lack of AI literacy, lack of the appropriate safeguard rails, they can inadvertently cause harm. So just a few examples, right? The state of Michigan, they had procured an AI model that would predict welfare fraud. It ran for a period of 3 years with an accuracy score of less than 10%. So you had mainly socioeconomically disadvantaged families being fined erroneously in courts. Another example, a region in Spain, their police force procured an AI model to predict the recidivism of domestic abusers. So the way this would work, if you had a concern about a former partner, you would go to the cops with your concern. They would put in the person's information into the algorithm. The algorithm would spit out a score. If the score was high enough, the police would put a protective order in place. If the score was too low, they wouldn't do anything. And it was only after 19 women were murdered that went through that program that they paused and did an audit on the model and had a conversation about, is this actually an appropriate use of artificial intelligence? So again, I've got a book full of examples. There are online databases full of examples. And now with the genesis of generative AI, which I'm sure we're going to discuss in quite a lot of detail today, I think that the outputs of AI it's much easier to see inequity or potential harm than it ever was with traditional or predictive models, which is why I think there's really been a rejuvenated or a much more a bigger topic of discussion around the subject of ethics and governance.
Thank you so much, Phaedra. I want to definitely pinpoint, you talked about some AI literacy, and so maybe we'll touch back on that later. And then also this inadvertent harm that really is stemming from people and that people, process, and tools. So thank you for sharing. Our next resource expert is Jason Hovey, who is the Director of School Partnerships at Khan Academy. Jason has over 25 years of educational technological experience across the United States. We are excited to have you join us. And Jason, thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you.
So Jason, how has Khan Academy used AI and other ed tech to create adaptive learning experiences tailored to students' knowledge and progress?
Yeah, thanks for having me today. It's great to be here with everybody. I think before I answer that question, I'd love to sort of highlight the landscape that's out there where we see AI as a potential solution to help, right? And so for those of you who don't know, hopefully most of you do, but Khan Academy is a nonprofit. Our mission is a free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. We have 160 plus million users around the globe. People largely think of us in the US as a K-12 play, right? And we certainly have millions of teachers and students across the country using us either independently or through our district partnerships. And now with Khanmigo, which is our AI tool, moving heavily into the student tutoring and teaching assistant space. But we've been widely used in sort of that what we say 14 environment for a decade plus now. And so what we see is students that use us either independently or with their districts and schools take us with them to college, right? And so basically 85% of first and second year students that have used Khan Academy in the past say they're using it in college, right? We think with COVID, that number's probably even increased, but the reality is that students take Khan Academy and they take it with them and use it to college. The reality we're looking at as we talk about higher education and AI is pretty bleak right now. And you all probably know this better than I, but COVID has wrought havoc on these students in the K-12 space and then leading into college, right? And so we know that basically nearly 60% of new college students have to take a remedial math course, right? And the numbers make 50 to 60% on the English language writing side. These numbers are up like 4, 5, 6x from like 2015, 2016. And so COVID has just, set us back. These kids are showing up in the college and, they're just not prepared, right? And so the ACT, for example, just issued a study recently, and it's basically said 20% of the students are prepared for college level introductory courses, right? And so this readiness score for courses in reading, English, math, and science, it's at a 32-year low. So what we're doing is we're not preparing kids for college. They show up in college and they have to take introductory courses. And the data is even worse for students of color and students that are slower socioeconomic, right? Those numbers are even worse because they're not preparing them. Couple that with you have students of color, lower socioeconomics, where they often don't have the opportunities to be able to take those higher ed math classes, higher ed science classes. And so before I even talk about AI, I think it's interesting, some of the things we've been doing over the past few years with folks like Caltech and Howard University is we've been saying, how do we remove these introductory barriers for people that may not have access to that? So a couple of pilots we've had going on the previous years, not even with AI, is students have been able for either Caltech or Howard take our higher ed courses, calculus, college algebra, physics, chemistry. And if they master those courses and then pass what those colleges put up as basically a final exam almost, so they get 89% proficiency on exam that those colleges put up, they're getting credit for those intro courses in college, right? So we're trying to level the playing field for students that might have access to those courses to be able to qualify for those intro courses. And then what we're now trying to do with AI is basically say, how do we play a role in helping those students get caught up, right? Those students that are needing those introductory courses, they're not coming prepared with the skills they need. Can we leverage Conmigo? Can we leverage AI to help them? The horror stories out there right now are really around cheating, right? And so the doomsday scenario we hear is kids are using AI to cheat, right? They're using it in math to get all the answers to their problems, and they're using it to write all their essays for them, right? Is that taking place? Absolutely. I would argue it's not really a cheating issue, it's a support issue. We have that data that I just talked about where kids are showing up to college and they're not prepared. They're not able to answer the math problems. They're not able to write. So what are they going to do? They're going to freak out and they're going to lean on the AI to do that forward. So it's almost like a desperation play for these students who we are not preparing in K-12 and early college to be able to do this, to be able to answer math problems, to be able to write appropriately. So they scramble to go to the AI and they used it inappropriately, right? So what we've been doing at Khan Academy is say, how do we leverage the power of the AI with Conmigo, which is our platform, take out that cheating component as best we can, have it be a support platform to backfill those skills that those students need to effectively be able to tackle college or intro level math to help them be better writers. Okay. And so that's the approach that we're taking is really solutions based. Let's take away the negativity, which is the cheating. And we talk about later, but there's a bunch of guardrails we put in where the AI we use with students doesn't give them the answer, right? It actually helps them as a good Socratic tutor would, but it's not going to give them the answer to the quadratic formula, the particular problem they have in front of them. So I think that's the big difference we have with the open AI platforms out there, ChatGPT-4 and others, where it will give the kids the answer. It will write the work for them. We've put guardrails in place, which doesn't do that. It doesn't do the work for them, but it functions as a Socratic tutor to help them understand the content and be more proficient in it. So again, the situation is pretty bleak, but our approach is how do we approach this from a student support centric approach to help the students be better prepared to tackle those courses, whether they're intro or not, as they enter the college level.
Thank you. I really appreciate your thoughtfulness in this. I loved hearing that cheating is not necessarily the issue, but it's a support issue, and how Conmigo is acting as a support, and it's a solution-based approach. So thank you very much for sharing that. So next we will have Dr. Trey Vasquez. Dr. Trey Vasquez is a director and professor for the Tony Jennings Exceptional Education Institute at UCF. Dr. Vasquez is a board-certified behavior analyst and has practiced education as a resource math teacher and school and behavior psychologist. His current research focuses on the evaluation of academic and behavioral outcomes for students with disabilities utilizing technology to enhance instruction, and has been supported in part by an $82 million grant from NSF, so National Science Foundation, the Department of Education, and the Office of Special Education Programs. So thank you so much for being here, Dr. Vasquez.
My pleasure.
So Dr. Vasquez, you have done incredible research in the ed tech space. Can you speak about how AI can be integrated into curriculum development and delivery to help learning outcomes in higher education?
Absolutely. And thank you for the opportunity to talk, and great to meet my fellow panelists. AI has been around for over 50 years. And I think a lot of people don't know how much work has been going on over the decades to get us to where we're at today. And, my former colleague just now talked about cheating, and he's absolutely right. Cheating, there's a national study that just came out last month by Basham et al., and they found that cheating has not increased when you look at the actual overall metrics. Humans have been cheating for years, and it's part of dealing with that whole piece of educational learning and going through curriculum, making sure the supports are there. But on the forefront of policy and development, there is an explosion of activity going on. So for those of you who are interested in the audience, we have a national center called the CITL Center, CITL.org. We've put out best case guidance usage for higher education faculty who want to engage and leverage AI technology. But I want to inform the community around some of the national efforts going on. So the Office of Education Technology out of the U.S. Department of Education has released several guiding documents that I think will be uploaded for this call. We also have some guidance from the White House. We have some guidance from OET. We are all looking at how do we wrangle some of this generative technology that's coming forth through AI, because that's the next iteration of this AI stuff. And we're looking to see how do we put in place guardrails, which are what we talked about earlier, for safe use, appropriate use, transparent use. There are multiple states, there's 12 in fact, that are developing their own guidance right now around AI usage. The federal government doesn't have current usage right now or guidance other than the OET recommendations. I would say that UNESCO and the EU are kind of ahead of the game on a global perspective of developing some of the policy analysis and guidance documents for not only higher ed, but for parents, teachers, K-12. And then I just want to talk a little bit about some of the amazing work that our team is doing at the Tony Jennings Institute. We're really at the forefront of some of the basic and applied research venues. We're working with institutions across the country in order to develop essentially AI agents to help with the recruiting of teachers. We're finding that, as we deploy these generative AI technologies, we have a significant disconnect between individuals who actually understand what artificial intelligence is, the development of that piece, but then also the usage, and then people that are just users and just scratching the surface and saying, I don't even know how to open a Google Doc, for an example. And so how do we get all the teachers and parents up to speed? How do we get faculty up to speed? Because we don't, one, have a lot of faculty who understand the cutting edge of AI to prepare the next generation of teachers. And we also don't have teachers that are prepared right now to support the K-12 students that they're engaged with. And so there needs to be a significant round of investment and training, professional literacy, development, all of those support mechanisms put in place so that we can have an outcome that desires all of the employment for the future.
Thank you. I really also want to bring our entire audience back. There's this thread that has gone through every single one of our conversations here. And it's all about level setting. So level setting with our ethics and level setting with our students and up through post-secondary, but then also level setting with teachers. So that's something that is very key here in our conversation, is this level setting across the continuum in education. So thank you so much, Dr. Vasquez. And as a reminder to our audience, you are welcome to submit questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And while we wait for those to come in, I have another question for all of our panelists before opening the floor for Q&A. So in higher education specifically, AI has come under fire by professors and school administrators. Do you think AI is misunderstood? What kind of misconceptions are associated with AI, and how can we work with institutions and policymakers to clear these misconceptions? So Phaedra, I'll start with you.
I think one common misconception is that people assume 100% of the effort to develop AI is coding. It's not true. Well over 70% of the effort to develop AI models is making sure you're picking the right data. And the reason why, as I mentioned at the very beginning, this is a socio-technical challenge is because of the real nature of data. My favorite definition of the word data is that it's an artifact of the human experience, right? We humans, we generate the data, or we make the machines that generate the data, but we have over 180 biases and counting. And what's truly fascinating about AI, I'll get my prop here, is that it acts as a mirror to reflect our biases back towards us. But we have to be brave enough and introspective enough to look into the mirror and decide, is what is being reflected back, does it align with my values? Does it align with my organization's values? If it does, be transparent about why did you pick the data that you did? Why did you pick the approach that you did, right? When you're building these AI models. Additionally, there's key considerations to take into account when you're thinking about what does it take to earn trust in AI? What does it take to earn people's trust? For example, we can all here agree that we expect AI models to be fair. But what I think is fair might not be what Dr. Vasquez thinks is fair or what Jason thinks is fair. There's actually many different worldviews just on the subject of fairness alone, right? As you have an AI model that's generating an output, you should be able to ascertain like what data, what methodology was used. You should be able to know who's accountable for that model. How much better does it perform compared to a human being? Was it audited? What was it audited for? How often is it being audited? Like this is actually really important information to know, including making sure that it's robust against adversaries and maintains data privacy. So when it comes to what we need to be teaching in schools, we actually need to be teaching the subject of AI differently. I would opine that we need to be teaching people how to be critical consumers of the technology and how to build models responsibly. Let's get it out of strictly being in computer science classes. I'd love to see it in social studies class. I mean, isn't that a better place for something this powerful to belong, especially if we wanted to reflect the needs of the very diverse communities that we need to serve? Additionally, and just wrapping this up, when I mentioned culture, like what is the right organizational culture to curate AI responsibly, there's actually 3 key tenets. One is you have to approach this space with humility, right? You've got to recognize that as much as there is to learn about the subject of AI, there's also a lot that has to be unlearned. So you've got to have a growth mindset and really offer psychological safety to people who will need to have really tough conversations about subjects like inequity, for example, which can get calcified in these models. The second tenet is to recognize that today there's a teeny tiny homogeneous group of people who have the power to determine which data sets to use to train these models. So if our aim is to have AI better reflect our diverse communities, we need far more diversity and inclusivity in terms of who's building these models and who's building the systems of governance around these models. And then lastly, and this gets me into why social studies class, is that the groups of people developing these AI models have to be multidisciplinary. They must be multidisciplinary. We need people who have backgrounds in psychology, sociology, anthropology, linguistics, law. We need all these different kinds of brains to determine, is this AI model actually going to augment human intelligence? How do we measure that? How do we measure empowerment? Right? How do we do this? How do we design an experience that actually empowers people? Plus all of the things that I described, like which worldview is being represented in this AI model? Whose definition of fairness? These aren't strictly computer science questions, which again is why we need to open it up intentionally in the schools, send the message out that everybody has a seat at this table, everybody, irrespective of what they want to be when they grow up.
Thank you, Phaedra. I really appreciate your thoughtful and responsive answer to our question. And next, we're going to go to Jason, and I'll reread the question just so that way it's top on our minds. So AI has come under fire by professors and school administrations. Do you think AI is misunderstood? And what kinds of misconceptions are associated with AI? And how can we work with institutions and policymakers to clear these misconceptions?
Yeah, I hate to follow Phaedra. She kind of hit the nail on the head for all the key points there. What I would say is to build on what Phaedra, if you're talking to anyone and they tell you they have this solved and figured out, run from the hills from them because they don't know what they're talking about, right? This is constantly a game of whack-a-mole for us at Khan Academy, really, right? Because it's constantly changing. The higher ed is concerned with those. I don't think they're misguided. These are real concerns that they have, right? I'm going to go a little maybe a lower level than Phaedra and say, for colleges, professors, teachers, et cetera, it's around cheating, right? This is being used for cheating. It's around data security and privacy, right? What's happening with the data as the students and folks are interacting with it? It's around accuracy. Is the data accurate, right? And then there's that bias that Phaedra talked about, right? How do we know that this is going to represent all communities and be respectful of all those communities? And we don't, right? This is a bit of a work in progress and everybody's doing their best. So I think the key takeaway is, think thoughtfully about the folks that you're working with. In the K-12 space, there's a bunch of companies jumping up every day. And we see them as trying to do a land grab and make a quick buck, right? And you actually read the privacy policies, and the privacy policies will say, we will not share student or teacher data unless we go out of business or get acquired, which is going to be 99% of these companies, right? And so the data is what is most important to people, right? And so what are these folks that are in this AI space doing with that data? What are they going to share with that data? The example I'll give you at Khan is we don't share anything with OpenAI. We leverage ChatGPT-4, but none of the behaviors that take place on Khanmigo are shared with OpenAI. These large language models love to learn from user behavior. That doesn't happen for us. To OpenAI's credit and ours, we said, we don't want people learning off what the students are teaching or teachers are doing. So that takes place on Khan Academy, right? There's accuracy, there's bias. When we first got our hold of the math on the accuracy side, it was not great. It was making tons of errors, right? And the problem with AI is when it's wrong, it does a really, really good job of convincing you it's right? It's almost spooky that it does. And so it starts to hallucinate and it can convince you it's right when it's wrong, right? So literally, like I said, we played a game of whack-a-mole where we would go through and had our math experts go through, pressure test, flag it, and improve that math. Is it 100% accurate? No. And anyone that tells you it is lying to you, right? Because it just isn't yet. The new versions of AI are getting much better. So as we have ChatGPT-4 Turbo and Omega, the math is getting much, much better. They'll get to a point eventually where the math is generally, almost 100% correct, but it's always a work in progress. So you have to think carefully about that, right? And admit these things. And then what guardrails are you putting in place? Like we talked about on the sharing side, we don't share the user behavior. We don't allow the cheating, right? So we prevent that cheating, which is giving some people some comfort. And then we report, right? There's reporting behind this, both on the data set, but what are those users doing? It's less a concern, I think, in higher ed, but in the K-12 space, there's a log of what the students are doing, right? How the students interacting with the AI. To make sure those guardrails in place, the students aren't doing inappropriate things, but also to inform the teacher, because that's part of the learning process. How are the students leveraging the AI? What are they using it for help for? Because that may help teachers look at the grading, assessing student performance. So it's transparency around the data, which I think is another key aspect here that has to be there. We can't be doing this in a bubble. We have to share as much data and learning as we have and be very transparent about what's not working and what we're trying to fix. So I don't think that higher ed and these folks are misguided. It's more about getting comfortable about what you're doing and being super transparent. This is new for everybody. So we're learning as we go, and admitting that up front, I think, helps everybody feel comfortable. That being said, there's some transformational things that can come here. One example I'll give you on the tutoring side, after COVID, K-12 space, higher ed, people leaned on live tutors to help these kids get caught up, right? The problem was the data we're seeing is this kids that needed help the most were the most reluctant to reach out, right? Why is that? I'm embarrassed, okay? I'm several grade levels behind. I don't understand the subject. You want to throw me in front of a live stranger right now, where I have to admit that I don't know something, right? Or maybe they don't look like me, maybe they don't sound like me. Maybe I need help at 11 o'clock at night because I've been working with my family's restaurant, and that's when I need it. AI is really eliminating a lot of that. It's not a human, so it's there's none of that bias or judgment that we see there. It can interact with the kids. It speaks multiple languages, right? So instantly it can speak Spanish, Portuguese, French, etc. It's available 24/7. So depending on when the kids want to interact, it's there for them. I have 3 daughters in college, and the last thing they want to interact with now is a live human, right? And so chatbots are just inherent to what they do. If you give them a preference to say, do you want to interact with like an AI-based tutor or a live tutor that's a stranger, they're going to take the AI-based solution 99 to 100% of the time, right? So I think this is also becoming a bit of an equity play as well for those users and students that were sort of embarrassed or reluctant to reach out. And in some ways, it can level the playing field there. So I don't want to say the higher ed institution spheres are misguided, but I think there's a lot of talking points and solutions that we can provide to them to get them comfortable.
I
Thank
can
you,
just give a
Jason.
buttress to some of that. So, I think initial responses to news is a knee-jerk reaction that most people do in order to save institutions, especially at the higher education level. We have a lot of constituents that we're trying to serve, and we have to make sure that we're doing so in an equitable manner. But as time has passed, the realization that we don't anthropomorphize these algorithms. It's not a human. It's not a living entity. It's math. And so buttressing the notion that we need a digital literacy component across multiple levels in order to educate individuals on, but not only best case scenarios, but critical thinking skills. Like, okay, this is telling me I should do X, Y, and Z. Is that the right way to do that? Should we have conversations? Should we look up whether the data are accurate in the form that they're given to? I can tell my students right now, as a professor, go write me a 100-page essay, and they can do that really quickly. But if I ask them to do it in APA style and cite 47 APA citations, it will put this citations in correct order, but it'll make up a lot of information because it doesn't have access. The database, as was stated earlier, is the critical crux here. And if we don't realize that the majority of these LLMs have been trained on open source data, then we leave a whole swath of human information off the table. For example, in my world, in education and psychology, all of our publications end up belonging to publishing houses because we sign away our intellectual property, and those publications are behind paywalls. And the 47 years of work that has been done on AI, specifically in education, has not been trained on any of the algorithms that are present today. Therefore, if I ask it for a very critical piece of information, it will not have the accurate data unless it exists somewhere out in the open. And that's where we have to have these conversations. When you're talking about guardrails, what's the right usage? The reality is that technology is not necessarily good or bad. It can go either way depending on the user and how they want to leverage this tool. And so we just want to make sure that as we teach the next generation, I completely agree with my 2 colleagues, we have to have the right policies in place. We have to start having conversations with each other. Remember the human in the loop. And, that's a critical component in order to have those convenings so that we can talk not only in our own, little world where we tend to work in silos, but across the globe. And Phaedra's absolutely correct. Our philosophies are very, very different across the globe. We have Western philosophies, Eastern philosophies. They do not see eye to eye on a lot of things. And so how do we build something that is tailored to our use case? And sometimes that's with an open source type environment. Sometimes it's a closed source environment where we have our own AIs on our own devices. And so we have to figure out what that looks like for our individual opportunities, our individual scenarios. And then as we push the envelope with multimodal data, which we're talking about multiple sources of input, what does that look like? How is the ethical use of cameras, for example, in a K-12 classroom going to operate? Am I going to leverage facial recognition, pupil recognition, voice recognition. There's a whole bunch of questions that we have on the basic side. Like, does producing a faster human, is that our objective? Or do we want to sit back and have some more philosophical questions and like, how do we make ourselves better, but not necessarily faster? Because humans are really, really bad at recalling information. Like, I'm in my 50s now and I'm getting to the point where I'm like, oh, what did I do yesterday? I forgot. But computers are really, really good at reciting information. If you give a computer a multiple choice test now, like a legal exam, it'll ace it. It'll identify cancers on a screen really quick and very accurately. The question on the table is, how do we leverage that in K-12? What's the next generation of employment looks like? Because if someone pulls the plug, I still want a human to be able to identify cancer on a screen really well. I still want to have someone be able to start social skills so that I have reciprocal conversations and make that a real world scenario. So we have a great amount of work to do. I think some of it is at the higher ed level. Some of it is at the partnership level with these companies that have vast control of these databases. And then we also have to have like really thoughtful conversations of what this is going to look like for the future.
Thank you. I think we've touched on that question extremely well between our three research experts. So I thank you all for that response. There are a few questions in our Q&A that I'm going to get to. I'm going to start with the first. In what ways can institutions support educators in adapting to changes in the role of AI in higher education? And I'll open the floor to whoever would like to answer first.
I have no problem starting. I sit on my university's AI policy committee right now. So if you don't have a committee that's talking about this now, I would say the first step is raise your hand and say, I want to lead this, and then bring a lot of people to the table and start having these conversations. Now, depending on the state that you're in, there are 12 states right now that have state guidance. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I know Kentucky has one. Hold on, I got it right here. Arizona, California, Kentucky, Mississippi, North Carolina, Ohio, Oklahoma, Oregon, Utah, Virginia, Washington, and West Virginia. Those are the 12 states that have some sort of guidance around AI at the state level. Now, if you're not in one of those states, then you have a lot of work to do. Are the 12 states that already have something out perfect? No, but it's a starting point. And so I would say talk, develop policy, develop guide rails, and then I'll leave it to my colleagues to fill in the blanks.
To tag on to what Dr. Vasquez said about states, another pattern that we've been seeing is there are several states establishing centers of excellence for responsible AI. And what this looks like are these are consortiums of government agencies plus academic institutions, not just higher ed, but also K through 12, and private industry coming together. Some of the states are also bringing in nonprofits. And what these centers of excellence are doing, they're trying to do three things. One is influence public policy for the use of AI and what are appropriate safeguard rails across the board. The second is to influence curriculum for AI literacy. What should be in an AI literacy curriculum in higher ed and K through 12, which is awesome. And then the third is for private industry partners to be able to publish, detail, and have conversations about how to extract value from AI, given industries that are really important to that state. And different states have different governing models for what these centers of excellence look like. But I think that this is a wonderful opportunity to share experience on like what is working, what isn't working, what have we learned with each other. So that's something that I would love to see more and more states pick up on.
Yeah, just to beat the same drum, form a policy team, right? Get a tiger team together that's looking at AI. To Trey and Phaedra's points, there's states that have guidance you can lean on. Ours is a little more K-12 specific, but it's still relevant. We have Teach AI, where you can go. There's curricular resources for teachers, et cetera, best policies, best practices. There's a lot of resources out there now that can help you shape your policies, but put together a team that can help do this. I would try a bunch of products, right? Start building that muscle of using these AI products. There's a ton that are out there for free. If you're interested on the teacher side, you can go to Conmigo. And it's free for anybody that has a teacher account on Khan Academy. You can do things like lesson planning and rubrics and exit tickets and things like that. So you can start getting yourself used to what's doing here. The one thing I'd caution is don't force this on people. We're seeing this in K-12. We're also seeing colleges. There's some people that are reluctant. And if you try to force this down their throat, this is the case for many products out there, there's going to be some pushback. We like to say, work with the coalition of the willing to start. You're going to know your professors. You're going to know your folks on the IT side of the house that are looking to embrace this. Start with them, right? Because they're going to be the ones that help you shape your policies effectively. They can help you build momentum. And then the proof of concept will help sway those people down the road, right? Because this can work effectively. But don't force this on large groups of people. I would be very reluctant to say this is going to be our university policy that everyone's going to start using without doing the trial and error, the testing of the products, developing those products, both at the university and the state level. Build that coalition of the willing, because that's how you're going to knock this down and build that support more broadly going forward.
Just one more resource I wanted to give everyone. If you're connected with a university, the National Science Foundation, with a joint coalition at the U.S. Department of Ed, released back in May 7 new national artificial intelligence research institutes, and they're across the nation. So if you happen to be in a state with one of those institutes, I highly recommend reaching out to those individuals. I put a link to kind of the news outlet that came out from NSF, but they're definitely working and looking to work with others and embrace the digital literacy component of things.
Yeah, I guess one more thing I'd say on the implementation side is, what is the problem this can help you solve, right? This is ultimately a tool at the end of the day, right? It's a glorified pencil, computer, etc. Don't use this just to use it, right? There's people that come to us like, oh, I want to use AI because it's the buzzword, I got to do it. What is the problem that this can help you solve, right? We talked about at the beginning, students don't know how to write. They need help writing, right? Their math scores are struggling. What is the problem at your university or college, community college, that this AI can potentially help you solve? And it could be back of the office as well, right? It's like an attendance and things like that, those solutions. But how do we thoughtfully leverage the AI to help you start solving problems like a strong tool would? Because ultimately this is a tool, right? So don't just throw it out there for AI's sake. Think about how it can help you solve a particular problem with student performance, accountability, tracking, etc.
Thank you. There was another question that Phaedra so kindly already answered, but I want to pose it to the other two panelists as well. And then Phaedra, if you have more comments, please insert yourself back into the conversation. So how can educators and policymakers build public trust and acceptance of AI technologies in education?
You want me to start, Jason? I can start. So, part of it is listening to your constituency. We just completed a national survey of higher education faculty, K-12 teachers, and parents. And it was really a 5-question survey that asked, are you aware of AI? What's your thinking around it? What are your concerns? Do you want it in the schools? And like an open-ended question, tell me anything else you want to tell. And we found that the vast majority of instructors at the higher ed level did not know much about AI. So there was a need for us to try and provide some sort of instruction, some professional development. We found the ones that did know about it didn't know how to incorporate it into their coursework. Same thing holds true for teachers, but then K-12 teachers had another level and they said, I'm concerned that my students won't learn those critical thinking skills. And we then responded, well, maybe we should talk about critical thinking skills in school in every single class. Parents are really interesting. They're totally split right now. We have some that are early adopters and saying, yeah, my kids and I are using these LLMs every day. We're having conversations, we're writing things together, we're doing math. And then we have others that are like, I am deathly afraid that Terminator's coming to take the kids. And so, how do we work with those dichotomy of variables and make sure that we address those? And I think part of it that Phaedra, clearly articulated, we have to work and show what's going into these databases, what's coming out, have some of this digital literacy, demystify the black box. It's not some magical thing. It really is prediction, and you've been using it for a lot longer than you think. And if you've ever turned on your phone with your face, that's narrow AI. If you've ever typed a little tweet or something on your piece and you see autocorrect, and everyone's like, oh, autocorrect. But the reality is it's gotten so good that it can write papers for you now. So how do we differentiate and leverage a tool appropriately, but at the same time, meet our constituents' needs across the world?
Yeah, just to build on what Trey said on the parent side, there's fear also that a lot of parents that AI is going to take their jobs, right? So it's like the Terminator's coming, it's going to take my jobs. That being said, they're all going to their districts and saying, what's your policy on AI? What do you do with my kids? Right. So even though they're afraid of it, they're holding you accountable for having some position on that. They may not agree with it, but they're demanding that you do that. One thing I want to highlight, because it goes across all these questions, is professional learning. It is now more important than ever to be able to train teachers, professors, et cetera, on this AI, particularly if you're going to roll something out. Throwing it to them and expecting them to master this on their own is folly, right? And so the example I'll give you on the Khan Academy in the K-12 space, training with us is mandatory. You cannot partner with us as a district or school unless your teachers get training on our platform. And in the spirit of full transparency, like we started doing this last August, we have a general professional learning training deck. It's gone over 30 iteration changes, right? Because things are changing. We get feedback from the people, new features roll out. So this is that like we're learning as we go type model we want to be transparent about, is that we change it as we go to meet the needs of what's happening. But training is key. It's as simple as the AI is going to be wrong. What do you do when it's wrong, right? What do you do when it gives a wrong error, to be able to prepare people for that, not just professors and teachers, but for their students. So I think anything you're doing here for teachers, professors, staff, have a professional learning component, a training component that's either given by the company you're working with or your solution on your own, to make those people feel supported, because this is brand new for everybody, right? We talked about that large group of people that are reluctant to embrace. You better have training for them, or you're not going to get them on board, or they might use it inappropriately, or they might not know what to do if they see funky things going on. So just weave in that professional learning as best you can.
And just to tag on to what I said online, trust has to be earned. It has to be earned. So putting in the work to show who's accountable for the model. Why did it come up with what it came up with? Expressing the data lineage, the data provenance of those answers. I mean, do you realize there are people today developing AI models to determine what percentage interest rates people should get on their home loans that do not know what the word redlining is. They do not know what that word is. So AI literacy, again, as you're thinking about embarking within this space, it has to be multidisciplinary in nature, as I mentioned. So putting in that rigor to know, is this an appropriate use of technology? How do I assess for the risk well before the model is developed? How would I mitigate for different kinds of risks? How do I audit the model? How do I interpret the results of those audits? How do I create an interpretable fact sheet? Do I have a governing body, right, to determine like what are our standards, our policies for our school system when it comes to these kinds of models, for these kinds of use cases? Like all of this, I know it seems really easy right now to just, pull things off of the shelf and just use it without thought. But it is incredibly important that we get this right. I mean, there's so much at stake, and these are such powerful tools that can make just huge differences in people's lives.
Thank you. And there's another question I want to kind of come back to. Phaedra, you talked about it when you pulled up your mirror, if you will. So how can we have AI better reflect the needs of diverse communities we serve? And what do we need to be doing to make sure we're enabling AI to do that?
I spoke about this a little bit, which is the messaging, like messaging who belongs in this conversation, who gets a seat at this table? And the answer is everybody, because we need earnestly a wider spectrum of different lived world experiences. Developing these AI models or choosing what data, which models, right? That's what we desperately, desperately, desperately need. And right now we just don't have that. And as Dr. Vasquez mentioned about open source, he's absolutely right. He's absolutely right. Think about, as you look at, you know, the wide swath of data that has been being used to train a lot of these large language models, right? Think about not just who does contribute to open source, but also who doesn't contribute to open source. Do you realize how few people actually get paid to contribute on open source? How few people get paid? So you're talking like, oh, huge block of the population that does not contribute this data, which is being used to train these new large language models. So again, in order to be able to get this right, to have these models reflect the needs of all of us, we need to be messaging in schools much earlier in people's academic careers. You belong here, and not just for those who self-categorize as coders or would be machine learning scientists or data scientists or computer scientists, but earnestly people who, as I mentioned, are interested in philosophy, psychology, anthropology, law, all of these different kinds of people. We need to tell them you belong here, because this is a much bigger conversation than we've had to date.
Just one real world example highlighting Phaedra's comments is that I had a colleague, Yangji Fu, who created an amazing application, an AI app that would sift through resumes and give HR the top 5, top 6 potential employees. When I looked at the pool of candidates that it would select, mind you, I work with individuals with varying disabilities. None of my students were at the top of the list. And so I went to Yangji and said, Yangji, I think your analysis tool saves a lot of time and I think it's really interesting, but how do you break your system so I can include my students that I'm interested in? And he says, why would you do that? And I think that's a really critical thought process, because when you talk to developers, computer scientists, they have a mindset of, I have a problem and I'm trying to get this machine to solve the problem. They're not thinking about the social relevant problems, the unintended outcomes of the programming. That's where we come in. And when we invite people to the table and have these diverse conversations and represent data from individuals with disabilities, ethnic minority backgrounds, et cetera, we then have a richer data set, which makes the AI even better, but also at the same time includes the individuals that are represented in the constituency we serve. And so I would just echo the fact that we have to have an invitation and opportunity to collaborate with developers, and it must be varied across multiple scenarios.
And we want you to play with these models, like go play, go play with image generators, go to an image generator and ask it the question, right? Show me an image of a typical CEO, a typical doctor, a typical prisoner, a typical terrorist, and keep asking that same prompt 100 times and just see which gender, which race, which ethnicity, what skin color is being shown back. Right? There's a great video. We'll share the link with you. The London Interdisciplinary School, they created this fantastic short video where they did this study with statisticians to measure what's being shown in these outputs. And they gave examples of a representational harm, right? Here in this country, you know, we've got, 39% of doctors are women, and yet a mere fraction, I think it was like 5% of the outputs actually showed a woman when you asked the prompt, show me an example of a typical doctor. And then they went further and they said, show me an image of a Barbie doll that represents each country around the world, right? All the ones from South American countries all had fair skin, blonde hair. The one representing Germany is literally wearing an outfit reminiscent of an SS Nazi uniform. And several of the Barbies from African countries are holding machine guns. And it begs the question, where did this data come from? And what is an appropriate output, right? Do we have these images represent society as it is now? And according to whose worldview? What is truth? Or do we want these outputs to represent society as we want it to be? So again, these are not technical questions, and why we're saying the things that we're saying.
Yeah, I don't know that I have much more to add on top of both Phaedra and Trey, which is amazing. Yeah, I mean, it's inclusion, right? This isn't necessarily an AI issue. This has been the issue in education for so long. When you talk about curricular development, testing, assessment, these are the same issues where you have to give everyone a voice at the table. And I guess what I would say is not only in the building of the product, right? But who is testing that product, who is leveraging that product and doing adaptations, but also who's using that product. And the one example I'll give you of Khan Academy, the temptation being, our headquarters based in Silicon Valley, it's very easy to roll your product out to very wealthy Silicon-based school districts who's going to tell you what you want to hear, right? Where did we test Conmigo to start? Newark, New Jersey, right? 3rd through 8th graders, Newark, New Jersey, lower socioeconomic district, very diverse. That was where we really got some tangible, great feedback on what it meant for those end users, both uncovering the biases we're talking about, but how to just make it more user-friendly for them, as a community versus your typical Silicon Valley advanced district that has, funding from Apple, et cetera. But inclusion, get everyone a voice, test heavily, and adapt.
Thank you. And we'll have, I think, our final question. There's about 4 minutes left in our webinar. So how can AI be leveraged to analyze large data sets in educational research to inform future higher education policy decisions on institutional levels? So Dr. Vasquez, you're unmuted, so we're going to start with you.
Sure. So I have a great example of this, and it's actually a K-12 example, but it can be adapted to higher ed. So I was working with a special education director, and she's responsible for creating a budget for next year's school. And she has to bring in 8 or 9 different data sets, right? They're all different. Some of them are hours of service, cost of service. Some of them revolve around contact hours, the IEP goals and objectives necessary for each child. It would take her on average 3 months to compile all this information, collate through everything, and then come up with a budget. Well, I sat her down with Power BI and said, hey, look, we can align all of these databases really quickly. We're going to create our initial template. We're going to have AI go through all of the existing databases and realign everything so that it's aligned to the primary template. And then we're going to ask it questions, and we're going to go through the analysis. We're going to go through a cost benefit analysis. We're going to go through a projection analysis for the next, 8 months. And it took us 2 hours. So 3 months of work, 2 hours, life-altering time savings. Those are just tips of the iceberg with regards to how we can leverage some of this technology. One of the pieces, though, that I want to leave before I let everyone else talk is that historically, research in higher education is a very long process. We write a grant proposal, send it to the feds. We wait 6 months to a year to hear back. And then we are going to do something that takes 3 to 5 years. That, in the world of AI, is insanity, because what we proposed a year and a half ago has been superseded probably 5 times because of the speed at which AI is being developed. And so we have to think more about the DARPA style research process where it's rapid iterative development. And that's something universities are going to struggle with immediately, because they're not set up to do rapid types of lean startup measurement and design. So
I'll just quickly say, I think it's going to make data processing much more efficient, right? Just in general, it's going to allow you to process large pieces of data very quickly, very effectively. On our side, how do we surface that? Students might be working in a course, let's say it's multivariable calculus. Every student within that course is going to be at a different level. The teacher has to go through and look at the data to make summaries and figure out what to work on next. Now she can leverage the AI to do that, right? So rather than spending an hour going through data and saying, okay, these are the students that are struggling, here's the skills I think they need to work on next, they can lean on the AI to do that, right? So it's not replacing the teacher, it's effectively making the teacher more efficient. And what I would end with, and this is my opinion, not a Khan opinion, but I think on the research efficacy assessment side is where we're going to see some incredible things. I think this traditional world of assessment in K-12, where you do summative, like year-end assessments, is going to be turned over completely by AI, right? We know the kids, they get to the testing season in April, half of them are checked out. Are we getting an accurate reading anyway? You will be able to do real-time assessments with the AI, right? It's going to be baked into the coursework. You will know which skills they're lacking, which they're picking up. So I do not see a world that is not, where assessment is not significantly disrupted by the benefits of AI and how it can do real-time assessment of what student performance is.
I wish we could keep this conversation going, but we are at time. It is now exactly 3 p.m. So thank you, Phaedra, Jason, and Dr. Vasquez for joining us today and engaging us in this informative discussion. Before closing our dialogue, the Hunt Institute shared our link to our upcoming webinar, so please check that out. And again, thank you all for joining us today, and we hope to see you all again very soon.
Cheers.